Asha Dore with Parley Lit, and I'm here with Dale Bridges for Totally Biased Reviews, talking about his book, The Mean Reds, a novel that came out in 2022.
Hello.
Hello.
So my name is Dale Bridges. I'm a writer and a painter living in Austin. To make a living, I work at the library here, which I enjoy quite a bit. My first novel that we'll be talking about today is called The Mean Reds. It was published by Stephen F. Austin State University Press here in Texas. Took me quite a long time to write it. I mean, most of that was figuring out how to write a novel, I guess, trying and failing. So I haven't been writing as much lately, and I'm going to get back on the horse again soon. For whatever reason, during the quarantine, I really got blocked as far as writing. I think it was all the anxiety and stress. And for me, writing is really front of the brain stuff. You know what I mean? I consciously have to think about it and worry about it and work very hard. And I think my brain was just said, no, we're not doing that right now. My partner at the time was an artist and painter, so we had a lot of art supplies around. And so I started painting at that time. I have no background in painting whatsoever, and wasn't anything I considered doing all that much. Didn't really think I had a lot of talent and skill at it, and I still don't think that's necessarily the case. But I did really take to it right away, and I think part of that is just painting to me is very back of the brain stuff. I'm not thinking about what it means or all the things. I'm just and I don't know how to do it, so it's just hours and hours of me just trying to do something that I really don't know how to do, and it occupies my anxiety brain a lot. If I paint a bird and people can tell it's a bird, I'm pretty happy that I painted a bird. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's not the case in writing. I agonize over it and I rethink all of it and I beat myself up about it. And it's just really nice to have an art form where I'm just like, yeah, this is kind of fun. You know what I mean? Writing's not fun for me, but I do need to get back to it. And I do have some ideas. My deep background from where I came from, I was born and raised in a really small rural town in Colorado. And my father was a fundamentalist preacher. And he was very strict. Like we couldn't, go to the movies or listen to secular music or go to dances. So it was a bit like Footloose, less Kenny Loggins music. So right now there seems to be with everything that's going on, it probably needs to be something that I need to write about, but it's going to be a struggle. It's going to be a lot different book than the novel I just wrote. And I'm trying to psych myself up for that.
Wow. Yeah. Well, so many things to talk about. I definitely want to loop back around to that. I grew up in Pensacola, Florida, where there was a Pentecostal revival for like 6 years during like the main chunk of my childhood. I am sort of a self-taught artist too, but I started like a long time ago. And I also had like a non-writing art period during the pandemic. I feel like I can really relate to what you're saying. Like it's really playful. And your example of like the bird is so spot on. It's so valid. The economy of what we have to do in writing is intense, at least when we want to publish, I think. It's just this constant like reviewing our own words over and over again. So it's interesting because a lot of times when I talk to people, we talk about how playful writing can be, but I think you're right. There's something about just like smearing paint or whatever on something that is so much more freeing and less demanding.
I've written some short stories and some stuff, but when I start seriously writing again, I'm hoping I can bring some of that playful aspect with me because it really hasn't been that for me for mostly in writing. It's pretty difficult.
Though I think your book is pretty playful. Do you have like a blurb for your book? Like how would you describe it to somebody?
My publisher, is describing it as the Big Heat meets the Big Lebowski murder happening during a small town film festival, which I like. It's kind of the tone of things.
Yeah, it's kind of like a modern noir. Like you've got like a, newspaper journalist working on a story and then like all the things go wrong in the process. I like that a lot.
I was going for, exactly a modern noir with a very incompetent and unreliable narrator at its core. We were talking a little bit about my background earlier. So since I wasn't really allowed to go to the movies, I was allowed to watch sort of older black and white movies at home. All of my peers were, they're, watching Rob Lowe and Robert Downey Jr. and stuff. And I was just pretty immersed into, Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy and whatnot. And when I went off to college and was finally sort of had the freedom to consume whatever pop culture I wanted, I caught up on all those John Hughes movies and all like the shows and everything. But I still held like this special place in my heart for those old movies that I grew up on, and I still love those so much. This particular novel is definitely based on my experiences being a journalist in Boulder, Colorado. Obviously very much fiction, but I'm taking from, I lived in the building that's described in the book. I worked at a weekly newspaper that, is similar to the one in the book there. At that newspaper, a strip club did open up downtown in Boulder and people freaked out, and I wrote a story about it. So these are all things that, like, as I was working, how we do as fiction writers, we're weirdos and we just sort of have a constant running fantasy about like either our lives, well, probably both our lives and the stories that we're writing in our heads. The life that I was living was pretty interesting at the time, and I started, writing this story. I didn't start putting it down on paper until I'd moved to Austin, but the germs of the story, these characters that I was meeting, these scenarios were all like sort of going there. And then there's a film festival in Boulder, that I attended all the time. And so that was a good setting. And then I just brought some of my own experiences and my obsession. Cool thing about being a writer is, if you're obsessed with something like old movies and you're writing something about, then you can go back and watch, all these old movies and just really get into your own obsession quite a bit if you incorporate it into the story.
I'm often, when I'm reading, especially like people I know, because like I love this era of my life that I'm in right now where I have at least met or sometimes know very well a lot of the writers whose books I'm reading, so I know about their lives. And I'm often thinking about how we're kind of lying, we're kind of full of shit sometimes when we write fiction because we're really writing like a speculative version of our own lives, very often. So I was going to ask like what your background was because it does seem like you know a lot about journalism and then a lot about old movies. And I love the character V so much. It reminds me of Jean Smart's character on Hacks a little bit, having somebody who does come off as kind of incompetent, interacting with somebody who used to be famous is like this intersection of personalities is really fun.
I love that you said Jean Smart because that's exactly, if a movie was ever made, who I would want to play that character in the movie. I loved writing her. Ironically, she's one of the few characters that is completely made up. And I loved writing her backstory and creating plots for these weird old horror movies that she was. I loved doing all of that. It's kind of weird because I do have that job in Boulder, but I didn't really have a journalism background going into that. And my first book of short stories had been very heavily influenced by like satirical sci-fi and reminiscent of like Vonnegut and George Saunders and Margaret Atwood and things like that. After I graduated with my master's degree in literature, because the college that I was going to didn't have a creative writing program in it, and I just wound up there accidentally getting a master's degree. I had an opportunity to work at a college out in California as a college administrator, which was a horrible job, but I paid off my student loans in 2 years and saved up money and went to live in Prague to write my first novel. Yeah, it was great. I got about 100 pages into the novel, failed, tried another one. That one also failed. But my short stories were starting to get better. And when I came back, I have some friends in Colorado and I was sleeping on their couch. After a month or so, they're like, "When are you leaving?" And I was like, yeah, I should probably look for a job. And there was a job as a calendar editor at the local weekly newspaper. And I had no background in journalism, but I just lied on my resume and said I'd worked at my college newspaper and figured if they didn't check, that's kind of on them. And they didn't. So I got this job at this newspaper, right? And I've never worked at a newspaper before. And my editor, she's a very amazing, capable one. She's a romance novelist. So the character in the book is very much based on her. Just brilliant woman. But busy, so busy. And so she's just like, "Okay, Dale, this article looks good. I need you to go change the subhead and the byline and then, send it off to the printer. I was like, yeah, no problem at all, no problem. And then I'd go back to my desk and Google, what is a subhead? What is a byline? Oh, okay. And after several months of that, I did go into her office and close the door and come clean. And she was like, that was stupid. You're a good writer. You're doing fine. Go back out to your desk. Don't ever do that again, basically. And so that was sort of how I got that job in journalism. But the publisher was worse than the publisher I wrote. It's loosely based on him, changed some details, but like he was just the worst human being I've ever met. And to be honest, I wasn't a great journalist. I ended up in arts and entertainment for a while, which was a good fit for me because I wasn't very good at hard news. I was still a bit of a fiction writer. I cared more about the story and the way the story like got told than I cared about like the facts of the thing. And my editor was constantly trying to get me to be a better journalist. And I was kind of like, I don't really think this is my thing.
I love that story. And the publisher is a really funny character. I feel like I've met that guy so many times.
Yes.
Like what I love about that character is just that he kind of embodies this thing that I feel like I know about the world because I grew up in a super religious place and then like moved to the West Coast because I live in Seattle, but I've lived in Portland and I've lived in California. And I've been to Boulder. I've had friends in Boulder, and this way that people like leave Christianity or something and they like lean into the exact same kind of bullshit, but in a new agey way.
Yeah. And they don't seem to see the problem with that. You can still be a toxic a-hole and be a Buddhist.
It kind of leans into the noir tone of the novel. And I wondered if you watched like a bunch of noir movies or if you read books. Like I realized I don't think I've read a noir book in a long time, but I also don't read. I've been reading books for people that I interview, and I haven't read a lot of fiction. I've ended up talking to a lot more poets and people who write nonfiction. So as I was reading your novel, it's like so much noir language from the main character, from in the dialogue. The beats are very noir.
You're like one of the first people to, especially like the beats. Some of the language is very obviously noir. Some of it's just more if you know the genre better. Those quick conversations that are not necessarily entirely realistic, but they're still so fun. And just the rhythm of the novel was supposed to be. And yeah, it was just like, oh, I guess so many noir movies I got to watch. And now I get to take a deep dive into like, oh, what are the ones I haven't seen? And what's so cool about noir is it's a lot more expansive than people think that it is. It doesn't have to be a detective and a femme fatale, you know what I mean? That's sort of the quintessential, but it's just like more of a mood, really, than anything with noir. There's some noirs out there that aren't really mysteries at all, but you're like, it just feels right. It feels like a noir, and we have to count it as that. And I love that about the genre, too.
I feel like in my mind, or maybe the like very traditional version, like you said, the detective and the femme fatale, but like also like I didn't realize that there's such a tradition of having like the detective tends to be kind of struggling like with something like being an alcoholic or being depressed or something like that. What I really like about your book, there's this thing with the narrator describing women in that very sexy way, but then kind of very quickly becoming embarrassed or having to check himself or like having this kind of like self-reflection that maybe he wasn't hoping for. That's also really traditional, and it's really funny. Some of the things that happened to him, like right after a paragraph describing a woman, it's almost like you can expect him to deal with something unfortunate right after he gets into his view,
I learned this style of writing kind of from being a journalist of like I had to learn like a nonfiction voice to write in that was more realistic. And so this came out of developing that. And so also this story came out of that. I really love character-driven novels. I love dark humor. And I like when a writer gets into their own shit. I like when they really self-examine their own worst, the own worst aspects of their own personality and their own psychology and their own lives. And you can sort of feel that as a reader when it's done well with certain writers. And that's also what I was doing with this novel. If I was in a noir situation, there's no way I'm going to be tough Humphrey Bogart, punching the guy. You know what I mean? Like I would want to be that. I would go into it being like, yeah, that's what I'm going to be. But there's no way I'm going to be that. I'm a wuss. After the journalism job, I just sort of randomly got this job as the manager of a medical marijuana dispensary right when that became legal.
What a transition.
Yeah, I know, right? I've never been like a big pothead like a lot of the people were who were working there, but they were giving me free samples like every day. He's like, you have to try this for your job. So I was smoking way too much weed. I was living in this crappy little place and I was really locked into my own fantasy world to an unhealthy degree. I don't know if you've ever been there before or not, but we can really get inside as writers. We can really get inside our own heads in a bad way. And after stepping back away from that, after I'd gotten like past that stuff, I wanted to examine that part of myself. Sam is so trapped in that fantasy world that he can't really see reality from it. And he doesn't want to. The thing is, he is a heterosexual white man. He prefers to live in a fantasy world, and he can live in a fantasy world because he's afforded that privilege. And at the end, when he's given other options, he chooses to stay there. That's not what I did, thank goodness. But if I let this go as far as it could go, if I let the worst parts of myself travel as far as they can, what would be the end results of that?
I'm really glad that you brought that up. I think that's a really interesting take. How interesting. And I was going to ask you what you would like your reader to take away from this, which I feel like some of my questions are just mean. And that's one of them. But I love this idea of, examining whether we're indulging in our own fantasies or rooted in reality. Other than that, do you have a different answer for that question? What you would like the reader to take away from this?
I do. That is absolutely the first one. We all have our own thing. We spend a lot of time examining other people's faults, but I think the most important thing is to really examine your own self and what your personal problems and weaknesses are. And just know that maybe years of therapy, you can do something. Sometimes you can't do anything about it. But to know it, I think, puts yourself a little bit in check. But then the other thing is this is in its own way a love letter to journalism and old school real journalism. What I discovered when I first started working at that job is that journalists work so much harder than I ever knew. And they have such a difficult job and they take it so seriously. And in order to stay in that thing, you really have to love it, but also sort of sacrifice so many things in order to stay in it. And it's the difference between what Sam is doing online, which is these breezy little blogging things that he's doing. And now I would have probably written them as TikTok videos or something like that, as opposed to what Victoria is asking him to do, to dig deep. You need to find real sources. You need to get quotes. You need to do real journalism. And not that can't happen on blogs and TikTok and those other things. But I do think that's where a lot of the misinformation happens in a fun way, sort of the difference between the two of what a real journalism looks like and what some guy who happens to have a press badge is living in this fun fantasy world. And how much easier that is to take advantage of. There was a minute where I was working at the job, somebody did pose hey, your editor is going to be quitting eventually. We think you'd be great for this next position. And I at least had enough wherewithal to be like, hell no. Are you guys kidding me? That's ridiculous. So many other people are more qualified than me.
I like thinking about that. And I think that especially right now, it's very important to think about what people are actually doing when they're reporting the news, because it is hard work. It is hard to write like that.
And you're right. It is so hard. And I know, there's so much animosity towards the media right now and bias. Certainly there are everybody's biased. You can't get around your own personal bias and feeling, but they take so many steps to try to remain objective and to tell the whole story. And then other quote unquote news outlets just sort of take other people's reporting, pick out the bits that they want to have, and then just have somebody do a commentary on it. And that's the honest news. Yeah, I really wish people would know just what goes into real journalism. And it was an eye-opening experience for me, for sure. I did not know it was that in depth.
I think that's true. And it's really, really important right now. I'm really glad that we're talking about this. I want to pivot and I want to ask you about the publishing process.
You know how it is with writing and publishing. My first book of short stories, you send it out to agents and then you send it out to bigger independent publishers. And my first book of short stories was published by a small publisher in Colorado who had a magazine who had published my works before. And this one is a small university here in Texas that I found after submitting for quite a while. They helped a little bit more, but it was a bit of the same thing, just kind of on your own with a lot of small presses. And I managed to get some publicity back in Colorado where the book was based. I had a means to make like one trip. It was probably about a full year after the book came out that I went back to Colorado for a book tour back there as much as I could do it. The culmination was supposed to be a big event in Boulder at the Boulder bookstore, which is a lot harder to set up than it used to be. But I was expecting a lot of people, and they just got hit with a blizzard, like a serious blizzard, and a local school shooting on the day of my thing. And so admirably, we still had like 15 people there, which was nice. But I had like one shot to do like a bigger thing, and that kind of put the kibosh on it. And then it's been slow. I'm not good at this part. I'm not good at the publicity part of the things, and I know I should get better, and I know I got to work at it. I start off with a lot of energy, because you put 2+ years into writing that book and then editing it and then getting it published, and you want people to see it, and you want it to get out there in the world. So I went in it with full energy and did all the social media stuff, and sent out all the press things and stuff. And I think I made it about 6 months before I really just ran out of steam. I was like, I just can't keep it up anymore. But I think what's fortunately happening is all that work. I am having like sort of a slew of interviews and articles now. So the work does pay off. It just sometimes it's not as immediate as you hope it will be. I'm doing probably as much as far as the book is now than when it came out, just because it took a lot of people so long to come around to it and get caught up with their own stuff to be able to do it. I really think the fans that would enjoy it the most are like people who love old movies and noir, and trying to get movie people to read a book is not easy. When I do get movie people to read it, they really like it and they're into it. And I think traditional mystery people didn't really get the book. They're like, why is he so incompetent and he's not cool? And he's not really solving the mystery very well. And we don't get why this. I was like, It was a weird thing, trying to find an audience for it. And I'm still sort of hoping it finds its place eventually.
I feel like it complicates the genre. So it's not genre fiction, but I can imagine that people who are used to genre fiction are like, this doesn't fit my formula. So
exactly. And then I think some literary people are like, I don't read mysteries. You know what I mean? And then I'm like, but it's not. Yeah. I learned to sort of let go of that for a while. When you're young and you're like starting off as a writer or whatever, you're so naive, which is helpful, because if you weren't that naive, you would never keep doing it. Like if you knew how hard all this was and how little reward you were going to get, you would never keep doing the thing that we do. But you also have like pretty lofty expectations. Like when I get on the bestsellers or, when I start making, and then after a while you realize like even a lot of your favorite authors do not get to make a living at this. You have to, at some point you have to be like, okay, I'm probably never going to make a living at this. This is the thing that makes my brain work, correctly. Or just at least it distracts it enough for me to stay sane. And I'm going to keep doing this. And I'll just find, jobs that give me the schedule that I need to do it. And I wish I would have come to the library sooner. It's such a perfect job for this. It works out so well. And they let me do some long days. So I have a 4-day week and then 3 days off to like paint and write. And it's pretty great.
I really appreciate what you're saying. I like the idea of looking at it like that. I think we're always going to have to be doing something else. I think there's always a parallel practice. There's always a hustle. Art is just not something we're invited to do in capitalism.
Yeah. So few people get to it, and like if you focus on that too much, it just breaks you. It breaks your heart. It breaks your soul. I'm not just writing for myself. I want people to read the things. I'm going to work, as hard as I can to get a bigger publisher each time and to get a bigger audience. But it's not going to be, I'm never going to write something because I think that it's going to be it's going to sell better than the other things that I'm going to write. I'm just going to write something that I'm proud of. I'm going to have hopefully an artistic legacy that may be small, but like is something that I can really be proud of. And I think that's a good life's work. I think in a capitalist society, the other thing that we focus so much on success that like people are embarrassed to be creative. My paintings aren't that great, but they are something that only my weird mind can produce. That's what the creativity is about, is like doing something that only you could do because you're an individual. In a society that just reproduces people and brands people, or what, it reminds you that you're an individual, that your thoughts are your own, that you can express things like nobody else can. And I think that's power.
Okay, this is Dale Bridges reading from his novel, The Mean Reds. I don't really have any editing equipment on this, so I'm going to try to do it all in one take. And if there are mistakes, there are mistakes. If you hear the sound of ice in glass, that is me drinking on a whiskey to help me get up my courage to finish this. For a little setup, the only thing you need to know is that the main narrator is obsessed with movies, and he's on his way to a local film festival, and he's trying to get through the door. Okay. It was dusk when I arrived at the theater, and the festivities were already underway. There was a sad, trampled red carpet extending from the front door to the curb, where two small searchlights traced aimless patterns in the bruised evening sky, valiantly attempting and failing to give the impression of Hollywood opulence. The marquee read, "Mountain View International Film Festival, opening night." The volunteer working the ticket booth was a skinny, bearded young man, perched high on a stool behind a glass partition, wearing a denim vest over a de-stressed Repo Man t-shirt with a name tag that said Frank, and sucking on a lime green vape in a Freudian manner, periodically releasing a chemtrail of white fog that melted away almost immediately and left behind the odor of a flatulent skunk that had recently dined out on rotten strawberries. I showed him my press pass, and he slid 2 drink tickets across the counter. I picked up the drink tickets and fluttered them in front of my face like a geisha fan. "Any chance you got more of these back there?" "We're only supposed to give out like 2 per person," he said. "It's like a policy or something." I nodded and leaned in conspiratorially. "Right. I get that, and I would never want to undermine a policy. But hear me out. It seems to me that everyone who's supposed to be in there is already in there, and you probably have a plethora of drink tickets left over, and it would be a shame if one of those tickets went to waste." He blinked rapidly. "I'd like to help you out, but they're pretty, fascist about the drink tickets." "Absolutely, but we can't let fascism rule the day, am I right? Fight the power." "Yeah, but the power gives me a free pass to the festival, and also it just wouldn't be fair to everyone else." "Sure, it's important to be fair." I tapped my chin with my index finger, desperately searching my THC-riddled brain for the right words. "So, okay, think of it like this. You have a litter of puppies, and the animal shelter where you work says you can only give away 2 puppies per person. You follow me?" "I don't work at an animal shelter." "It's just a hypothetical, Frank. You seem like a philosophical thinker, a student of the mind, an admirer of Socrates and Plato. Am I right?" He chewed on his vape. "I'm more of an Aristotle guy." "Well, there you go. Aristotle. He liked thought experiments, right?" "I guess." "Of course he did. So think of this as an Aristotelian thought experiment." "I don't think you're using that word correctly." I waved him off. "So according to this arbitrary policy, you're only allowed to give away 2 puppies per person, and if there are any puppies left over at the end of the day, you are required to kill them." "Whoa, man, that's heavy." Frank paused for a moment. "How?" "What do you mean?" I said. "I mean, how am I supposed to kill these hypothetical puppies?" "Oh, with an axe." "An axe?" "Uh-huh." Like they just keep an axe hanging on the wall in this animal shelter? That's correct, I said. At this particular shelter, any animal that doesn't find a forever home at the end of the day is cut in half with an axe that they hang on the wall. It's cruel, but that's their policy. I think that would be a health code violation, my dude. They clean the axe thoroughly, I said, with disinfectant. There's a big laminated chart in the break room on how to clean the axe and dispose of the chopped up puppy parts. It's all very sanitary. Frank squinted. And I have to do this? I have to chop up the puppies? It's not your favorite part of the job, Frank, but that's the policy. But hold on, we're not there yet, because you're very good at your job. In fact, you're the best puppy giver-awayer at this shelter, and you think you can find homes for all the puppies before the end of the day. You work hard, you give away a lot of puppies, but despite your best efforts, there are 6 furry, spotted newborn puppies left at the end of the day. Oh no, very sad. You start to take the axe off the wall. But then, wait a second. What's that? You hear the door jingle. The door jingles, said Frank. Yeah, I said. They have one of those bells things, one of those bell things on the door, so every time it opens, it jingles. Just like one bell, or is it one of those long strips with a lot of small bells attached to it? Which do you prefer, I asked. I like the strips, said Frank. They sound like sleigh bells. Okay. So the door opens just before closing and the bell strip jingles and a man walks in. A handsome and clever and smart man. And this handsome, clever, smart man says he'll take the rest of the puppies to a large, sun-dappled farm where they can go on little puppy walks in the pasture and take little puppy naps under the willow trees. No puppies have to get chopped in half today. Isn't that good news, Frank? He smiled and nodded. So, here's the predicament. Do you follow this meaningless and immoral policy and only let the man have 2 puppies and chop the other 4 puppies in half with the axe according to the regulations described on the laminated chart in the break room? Or do you take a stand against your tyrannical overlords like the hero I know you are and save all the puppies? I straightened my posture and put my hand over my heart. Save the puppies, Frank. Save those goddamn puppies. Frank inhaled sharply and shook his head, as though waking up from a coma. He stood up, raised his arms to chest level, and began a slow clap. That was the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard anyone say to get free booze, my dude. And both of my parents are alcoholics. I took a bow. Frank reached under the counter and came up with 6 more drink tickets. Bring back 2 puppies for me, he said. What's your breed? Whiskey. I knew I liked you, Frank. I grabbed the tickets and headed for the door.